Hello, my name is Tim Dial, and I am the managing broker for Nexa Mortgage. And I just wanted to put this little video together to give customers an idea of what the loan process is like or what the whole purchase process is like, especially for first-time home buyers. If you're not a first-time buyer, then you probably already kind of know how the process works. But a lot of first-time buyers I speak to just seem to have no idea kind of how the process works. So I wanted to put this video together, try to make it as short as possible, but also give a pretty good description of the process, how the process works, and what the steps are, et cetera, and a little bit about the programs maybe as well. So try to keep this short and sweet. But first of all, one thing that I always like to let customers know is how they should get started on the process. A lot of customers will be out there looking at homes either online or they'll be talking to realtors about houses and things like that, and they're not even pre-qualified or pre-approved yet. So the first step you want to take is to get pre-qualified or pre-approved, and the reason being is because the sellers are going to want to know that you are pre-qualified or pre-approved a lot of times before you even go into the house to look at it. Additionally, it makes sense too because you don't want to be out there wasting your time if you're looking at homes you can't afford, so stuff like that. So the pre-qualification process, we look at the debt ratio to make sure that that's in line, and that gives us a good idea of how much home you can afford and things like that. We want to make sure that you're not looking beyond your means and stuff. And a lot of customers are not real sure how that debt ratio process works or how it's calculated. So we do that for you. Also, I wanted to let you know a little bit about the difference between pre-qualification and pre-approval. The pre-qualification basically just means you fill out a loan application, you put your information in there, and then when we look at it, we run the pre-qualification based on what you put in the application. If there's anything inaccurate in the application, that's why it's not as strong as a pre-approval. It's because a pre-approval is based on not what you put into the application, but the documentation you provide to support the application. So in other words, if you put in the application, you make $60,000 a year, we get your pay stubs and you actually only make about $55,000 a year, then that can change how much you're approved for, because when we do the pre-approval, because you make a little bit less than what you put on the application, and now we have the supporting documentation and we can make those adjustments. So that's kind of how that works. And then additionally, once you get pre-qualified, what will happen is the system will send you a list of documentation to provide. Once you provide that documentation, then we can use that documentation to convert that pre-qualification into a pre-approval, usually the same day. So it doesn't take very long at all for us to go through that. And that's kind of how that works. And then once you get pre-approved, that's when it's time to start working with a real estate agent to try and find a house to purchase. You can look on Zillow and places like that, look online and stuff. However, sometimes those sites are not completely up to date as the agents will have. The agents will have up to the minute information provided by the multiple listing service. So if a house has gone under contract, it's no longer on the market, then it'll show that in their system, even though Zillow might be showing that it's still available. So that's kind of how that works. And additionally, I always like to cover a little bit about the agents, because some customers are out there, they'll choose a relative who's an agent or somebody they know who's an agent, but this person doesn't really do much. They're just kind of a part-time person who occasionally might do a transaction. This is normally a very bad idea, and I'm going to tell you exactly why. Is because your agent is kind of like your attorney in the transaction. You want somebody who's a professional, who's full-time, and who is very schooled in contract and negotiation within that process. If you have an agent who's inexperienced and not very good, but the seller has an agent who is experienced and very good, you're not going to get very terms when you negotiate that contract. So that's kind of how that works. The better agent you have, the better terms you'll end up getting when you're negotiating a contract. And it's become very important today because when you're writing the contract, a lot of people need things like closing costs paid by the seller and things like that. And you want to be able to negotiate that into the contract to make sure that you don't have to bring more money to the closing than you have, so that's very important. And then additionally, the other thing, the contracts are somewhat confusing depending on what state you're in. Like, for instance, customers in Indiana, on the contract, it shows there you can actually choose whether the buyer or the seller is paying for title work. You can also choose below that whether the buyer or the seller is ordering title work. And I have seen many contracts come through where it has the buyer paying for title work, but the seller ordering title work. That's a terrible idea because the seller could order title work from a company that charges a lot, and you're the one paying it because it says so in the contract. So if you're paying for the title work, you should be the one ordering the title work. That way you can shop it around. And we know of title companies that only charge, $350 to $450 for their fees. Some of the stuff like title insurance is set by the government as far as how much that is. So you don't have any control over that, but it's how much the title company actually charges themselves for their services. And if you get it for $350 to $450, where some other title companies charging over $1,000, you want to be able to select that title company if you're the one paying for it. Now, if the seller says they're paying for it, if it says that in the contract and they want to order it, that's not a big deal, because if they want to pay over $1,000 for title work and they're the ones ordering it, whatever. I mean, who cares at that point? It's not something you're paying for, so it doesn't really matter. So those are some of the little things why it's very important to have a really good agent working for you and negotiating for you. And so that's kind of how that works. Now, as far as the time frame and the way the whole process works, normally it's going to take about usually a month or so in most markets to find a house to purchase. And then you're looking at 2 to 4 weeks to close on it once you find the house. We can get a clear to close in 10 to 14 days with a lot of our lenders that we do business with. But a lot of times the sellers can't move that quickly anyway. So you're usually looking at 3 to 4 weeks to close is pretty normal once you get that contract accepted. So that's a little bit about how the process works. There's more detail that I can go into about certain aspects of the process. One thing that I do want to cover real quick before I get off here is once you do send in that initial documentation, that's just for pre-approval. And that's what we're going to submit to underwriting for the first underwrite. A lot of people get confused by this and think that's all they need to do, but that's not the case. What will happen is the underwriter will issue what's called a conditional approval. And that conditional approval just means that they are approving it, but there are these other items, these other conditions that still have to be satisfied. And when that happens, the processor on the file is going to reach out and let you know what documentation he or she still needs to get it into underwriting to get a final approval. There are also some things that will be required in that conditional approval that the processor has to obtain that you won't even know about. And then one of the conditions is also always the appraisal, because it hasn't come in yet, and the title work hasn't come in yet. So those are a couple of the conditions that you won't necessarily have anything to do with that the processor will submit once those items do come in. But I do always like to let people know that when the first approval comes out, it's always conditional. So don't be freaked out by it or anything like that, because that's just a part of the normal process. And then the processor will let you know what documentation is needed to satisfy the conditions so we can get a clear to close and be able to close by the closing date. So that's pretty much it. If you have any questions or anything, certainly feel free to reach out to me at any time, and I'm always here to help. Thank you.